Hello everyone, I am very glad that you're joining this story. Subscribe, like and comment. Enjoy the story, smile more often.
When I found out my husband had been cheating on me, I thought the worst was over. But nothing prepared me for what came next. My mom taking his side during our divorce. She said I was being too dramatic and even let him move in with her after I kicked him out. Now, years later, she's begging me to rebuild our relationship because he betrayed her too. 3 years ago, my life unraveled in the span of a single night. I'd always been a trusting person, sometimes to a fault, but Ethan, my husband of 5 years, had a way of making me doubt my instincts. Whenever I brought up the late-night work calls, he'd laugh it off and say I was overthinking things. When I noticed how he clung to his phone, even taking it into the bathroom with him, he'd accuse me of being paranoid. And when I mentioned how distant he'd become, he'd sigh and say he was just stressed. For months, I pushed aside the nagging voice in my head, convincing myself I was imagining things. But one night, when Ethan fell asleep on the couch after one of his so-called work emergencies, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. His laptop sat open on the coffee table, the screen still glowing. My hands trembled as I approached it, my heart pounding in my chest. What I found confirmed every suspicion I'd tried to ignore. Messages, hundreds of them, between Ethan and another woman. They weren't just flirty texts or suggestive emojis. These were full-blown confessions of love, plans for future getaways, and explicit details about their time together. It wasn't a fling. It was a second relationship, one he'd been carrying on right under my nose. I confronted him that night. He woke up groggy, confused, but as soon as he saw the laptop in my hands, his expression shifted. He didn't even try to deny it. "Yeah," he said, his tone flat, like he'd just admitted to forgetting to take out the trash. "Yeah? That's all you have to say?" I shouted, my voice cracking. "What do you want me to say, Sarah?" He snapped, sitting up. "You've been so cold lately. It's like I don't even exist to you anymore." His words hit me like a slap. "You're blaming me? You cheated, Ethan. You lied to me for months, and now it's my fault." "I'm not saying it's all your fault," he said, his voice annoyingly calm. "But relationships take two people, and honestly, you haven't been pulling your weight." I stared at him, stunned. I couldn't believe the audacity. Any lingering doubts about whether our marriage could be saved evaporated in that moment. This wasn't just a betrayal. It was a complete lack of accountability. By the next morning, I'd already filed for divorce. I packed his things into boxes, called a locksmith, and left the rest to my lawyer. It was over. But as hard as it was to lose Ethan, it was nothing compared to what came next. After I filed the papers, I called my mom, hoping for comfort. She'd always been my rock, the person I turned to when life felt unbearable. If anyone could help me through this, it was her. "Mom," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "Ethan's been cheating on me. I filed for divorce." There was a pause on the other end of the line. Then, instead of the sympathy I expected, she said, "Are you sure that's the right decision, honey? Maybe you're being impulsive." I blinked, stunned. "Impulsive? Mom, he's been having an affair. For months. There's no coming back from that." "Marriage is hard, Sarah," she said, her tone annoyingly even. "People make mistakes. Maybe you could work things out." "Work things out?" I repeated, my voice rising. "He betrayed me, Mom. How can you even say that?" She sighed like I was being unreasonable. "I just think you're rushing into this. Divorce is a big step." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. My own mother was siding with my cheating husband. "You're unbelievable," I said, hanging up before I could say something I'd regret. It got worse. A few days after I kicked Ethan out of the house, I found out where he was staying, with my mom. She'd invited him to move in, saying he needed support during this difficult time. I confronted her immediately. "What the hell are you doing, Mom?" I asked, my anger bubbling over. "He cheated on me, and you're letting him live with you?" "Sarah, he had nowhere else to go," she said, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world. "He could have gone to a hotel," I shouted, "or literally anywhere else. You're my mother. You're supposed to support me, not him." "I am supporting you," she said. "But Ethan's family too, and he's hurting. I'm just trying to do what's best for everyone." Her words felt like another betrayal, a knife twisting in the wound Ethan had already created. In her mind, she was being neutral, but in reality, she'd chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. From that moment on, something broke between us. My mom wasn't just my mother anymore. She was the person who had taken in the man who destroyed my marriage, the person who had looked at my pain and decided it wasn't as important as his comfort. I didn't know how to move forward, but one thing was clear. I couldn't trust her anymore. At first, I tried to convince myself that my mom's actions were some kind of misunderstanding. She had always been the peacemaker in our family, the one who hated drama and did everything she could to smooth things over. I told myself she was just trying to keep the peace, to avoid taking sides in a situation that had split our family in half. But as the days turned into weeks, it became painfully clear that this wasn't neutrality. It was favoritism. My mom wasn't just staying out of it. She was actively supporting Ethan. The first red flag came during a phone call not long after Ethan moved in with her. I had spent the day gathering evidence for my lawyer and juggling the endless stream of paperwork that comes with divorce. I was exhausted emotionally and physically, but I needed to vent, to feel like someone was in my corner. "Mom, I can't believe this is my life right now," I said, my voice heavy with frustration. "Ethan isn't just a bad husband. He's a liar, a cheater, and a manipulator. And now he's acting like he's the victim in all of this." There was a long pause on the other end of the line. Then, she said something that made my stomach drop. "Well, honey, Ethan did mention that he felt neglected." "What?" I said, my voice rising. "He said you'd been distant," she continued, her tone calm, almost rehearsed. "That you stopped making time for him, and that's why he felt the need to cheat on me?" I interrupted, my voice shaking. "Mom, are you seriously defending him right now?" "I'm not defending him," she said quickly. "I just think there's two sides to every story. Maybe if you had tried harder to make him feel appreciated." "Are you kidding me?" I yelled. "He cheated, Mom. He had an affair. How is any of this my fault?" "I'm not saying it's your fault," she said, her voice maddeningly even. "I just think you could have done more to keep the marriage together." Hearing those words from my own mother felt like a slap in the face. I ended the call, tears streaming down my face, unable to comprehend how she could twist the situation into something I had done wrong. Things only got worse from there. As the divorce proceedings began, my mom's allegiance to Ethan became undeniable. She showed up to the court hearings, not to support me, but to sit with him. I remember walking into the courtroom for our first hearing, my stomach churning with anxiety. I was bracing myself to see Ethan, to face the man who had turned my life upside down. But when I saw my mom sitting beside him, leaning in close and whispering like they were old friends, I felt like the ground had been ripped out from under me. She didn't even look at me when I walked past her. It was as if I was the stranger in the room, and Ethan was the one she had known and loved all her life. After the hearing, I confronted her in the hallway. "What are you doing?" I demanded, my voice low but furious. "Why are you here with him?" "Sarah, I'm just trying to support both of you," she said, as if that made any sense. "Both of us?" I said, incredulous. "Mom, he's the one who cheated. He's the reason we're here. How can you possibly support him?" She sighed, as if I was being unreasonable. "You're my daughter, and I love you. But Ethan's family too. I don't want to see this get uglier than it has to." "It's already ugly," I snapped. "And you're making it worse." But she wouldn't listen. She acted as if her presence in Ethan's corner was some noble act of neutrality, completely ignoring the fact that it felt like another betrayal. Over the next few weeks, my mom's behavior only solidified the realization that she had chosen Ethan over me. She continued to repeat his excuses, word for word whenever we spoke. "Ethan's really hurting right now," she'd say, as if I wasn't. "He said he just wants to make things right, but you're not giving him the chance." Eventually, I stopped trying to reason with her. It was clear that nothing I said would change her mind. She had decided that Ethan's version of events was the truth, and my pain was nothing more than a dramatic overreaction. The hardest part wasn't losing Ethan, it was losing my mom. I had always thought that no matter what happened in life, she would be there for me. But now, I realized I was on my own. The person who was supposed to be my biggest supporter had become another person I couldn't trust. And that loss cut deeper than I ever could have imagined. The divorce dragged on for months, a painful slog of paperwork, court hearings, and endless discussions about who got what. Ethan played the part of the wronged husband perfectly, painting me as the bitter ex-wife who was determined to take everything. My lawyer fought hard, but in the end, Ethan walked away with half of everything we'd built together. He took the car, a chunk of our savings, and even some of the furniture from our home. The home I had to sell because I couldn't afford the mortgage on my own anymore. It felt like a final insult, the cheater walking away with half of my life while I was left scrambling to start over. By the time the divorce was finalized, I was emotionally drained. I told myself it was over, that I could finally move on, but the damage lingered like a shadow I couldn't shake. And just when I thought things couldn't get worse, my mom and Ethan's relationship started to flourish in ways I couldn't have imagined. At first, it was subtle, My mom would mention that Ethan had stopped by for dinner or that she'd run into him at the grocery store. "He's really struggling, Sarah," she said during one of our rare phone calls. "I just feel so bad for him." I bit my tongue, trying to hold back the words I wanted to scream. What about me? Do you feel bad for me? But as time went on, her support for Ethan became impossible to ignore. She started posting photos of them together on Facebook, smiling at family events, standing side by side at church functions, even going to dinner at restaurants Ethan and I used to frequent. Every time I saw one of those pictures, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. My mom wasn't just ignoring my pain. She was flaunting her bond with the man who had destroyed my life. I finally decided to confront her. One evening, after seeing yet another photo of her and Ethan on social media, I called her. I could barely keep my voice steady as I asked, "Mom, why are you doing this? Why are you spending so much time with him?" She sounded genuinely confused. "What do you mean? Ethan's still family. Just because you two couldn't work things out doesn't mean I have to stop caring about him." "He's not family," I snapped. "He's my ex-husband, and he betrayed me. How can you not see how much this hurts me?" "Sarah," she said, her tone exasperated, "you're being too emotional about this. I'm not taking sides. I'm just trying to be there for everyone. Everyone except me," I said bitterly. "Do you even care about what I've been through? Or is Ethan's sob story the only thing that matters to you?" She sighed, as if I was the one being unreasonable. "I'm sorry you feel that way, but you're going to regret pushing me away. One day, you'll see that I was just trying to do the right thing." That conversation was the breaking point for me. I realized that no matter how much I tried to explain my side, no matter how many times I told her how much she was hurting me, she wasn't going to change. In her mind, she was the peacemaker, the person holding the family together. But in reality, she was tearing it apart. I stopped calling her after that. When she called me, I let it go to voicemail. I didn't visit her, didn't invite her to my new apartment, didn't share updates about my life. Eventually, I blocked her on social media and stopped responding to her texts altogether. It wasn't an easy decision. Cutting off my mom felt like cutting off a piece of myself, like severing a bond that had been there since birth. But I couldn't keep sacrificing my mental health for someone who couldn't even see how much pain they were causing me. I told myself it was the right thing to do, that I was protecting myself, but it still hurt. There were nights when I'd lie awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I'd made the wrong choice. But then I'd remember the photos, the dismissive comments, the way she'd chosen Ethan over me time and time again, and the guilt would fade. If she couldn't see how much she'd hurt me, I wasn't going to waste my energy trying to convince her. After the fallout with my mom and the finalization of the divorce, I threw myself into the only thing I could control, rebuilding my life. Starting over wasn't easy. It felt like trying to construct a house on the rubble of everything I'd lost. But little by little, I made progress. The first step was leaving the town where everything had happened. The memories clung to every corner. The coffee shop where Ethan and I used to go on Sunday mornings. The park where we'd walk in the fall. Even my mom's house, which now felt more like a symbol of betrayal than a place of comfort. I found a job in a new city a few hours away, packed up my things, and left without looking back. Therapy became my lifeline during those first few months. My therapist, Rachel, helped me unpack the pain I'd been carrying, not just from Ethan's betrayal, but from my mom's as well. "It's okay to grieve the relationship you thought you had with her," Rachel said during one session. "That loss is just as real as the loss of your marriage." Slowly but surely, I began to heal. I found a small apartment that felt like my own little sanctuary, filled it with thrifted furniture and plants, and started making it feel like home. I focused on my new job, where I was surrounded by supportive colleagues who didn't know my past and didn't judge me for the baggage I carried. I even started dating again, cautiously at first. The thought of letting someone into my life after what Ethan had done was terrifying, but I knew I didn't want his actions to define the rest of my future. Over time, I began to rediscover what it felt like to trust someone, to let myself hope again. But no matter how much progress I made, there was always a hole where my relationship with my mom used to be. I missed her in the small, everyday moments. I missed calling her to share good news, hearing her advice when I felt stuck, or even just chatting about nothing in particular. There were times when I'd pick up my phone, instinctively scrolling to her number before remembering why I couldn't call. Despite everything she'd done, part of me still wanted her in my life. I wanted her to see how much she'd hurt me, to apologize, to make things right. But every time I thought about reaching out, I remembered the way she had chosen Ethan over me, how she'd dismissed my pain and ignored my pleas for understanding. It was a wound that hadn't fully healed, and I wasn't sure it ever would. Then one evening, my phone rang. The number wasn't familiar, but something made me pick it up. "Hello," I said cautiously. "Hi, sweetie," a voice said on the other end. My stomach dropped. It was my mom. For a moment, I couldn't speak. It had been years since I'd heard her voice, but the sound of it brought back a flood of emotions. Anger, sadness, longing. "How did you get this number?" I asked, my tone sharper than I intended. "I used a friend's phone," she said, her voice soft and cautious. "I know it's been a while, but can we talk?" Her words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up, to protect myself from whatever she had to say. But another part of me, the part that still missed her, that still wanted to believe she could change, kept me on the line. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked finally, my voice cold but steady. She hesitated, then sighed. "I just want to make things right. Please, Sarah, can we meet? Just once?" I didn't answer right away. My mind was racing, torn between the walls I'd built to protect myself and the fragile hope that maybe, just maybe, she was ready to take responsibility for what she'd done. "I'll think about it," I said eventually, my tone guarded. "Thank you," she said, relief evident in her voice. "That's all I'm asking." When the call ended, I sat in silence, staring at my phone. I didn't know if I could trust her or if I was ready to open that door again. But for the first time in years, it felt like there might be a chance, however small, for something to change. I wasn't sure what I expected when I agreed to meet her. Maybe I thought she'd offer some weak justification for her actions. Or worse, double down on her belief that she'd done nothing wrong. Either way, I walked into that cafe with my guard firmly up. My mom was already sitting at a table near the window, fidgeting with her hands as she waited. She looked older than I remembered, her hair streaked with more gray and her posture slightly hunched. When she saw me, her face lit up with a cautious smile, but I didn't return it. "Hi, sweetie," she said as I sat down across from her. "What do you want, Mom?" I asked, skipping the pleasantries. I wasn't here to make small talk. She hesitated, her hands twisting together on the table. "I just wanted to say I'm sorry," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. The words hung in the air between us, heavy with years of unspoken pain. I stared at her, unsure how to respond. I'd imagined this moment so many times, but now that it was happening, I didn't feel the relief I thought I would. "I know I hurt you," she continued, her voice trembling. "And I regret the choices I made. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I see now how wrong I was." A bitter laugh escaped my lips before I could stop it. "The right thing?" I said, shaking my head. "You sided with Ethan. You let him live with you. You supported him in court. How was any of that the right thing?" Tears welled up in her eyes, and she quickly wiped them away. "I thought I was helping," she said. "I thought if I stayed neutral, I could hold everything together. But I didn't see how much I was hurting you in the process." Her words felt hollow, like an echo of something I'd once wanted to hear but no longer trusted. "Why now?" I asked finally. "Why are you apologizing now, after all this time?" Her expression shifted, guilt etched into every line of her face. "Because I've had time to think," she said. "And because Ethan betrayed me too." I felt my stomach drop. "What do you mean?" She took a shaky breath before answering. "After your divorce, he stayed with me for almost a year. I thought I was helping him get back on his feet, but he was lying to me the whole time. He borrowed thousands of dollars from me, promising to pay it back, but he never did. And then," she paused, her voice breaking, "I found out he was telling people I was pathetic for taking him in. Hearing that should have felt vindicating, but instead, it made my blood boil." "So what?" I said, my voice rising. "You're only apologizing because he hurt you too? Not because of what you did to me?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That's not it. I've had a lot of time to think, and I see now how much I failed you. I let you down when you needed me most, and I'll never forgive myself for that." Her voice cracked on the last word, and for the first time, I saw just how much this was costing her. But that didn't make the pain go away. "I don't know if I can forgive you, Mom," I said after a long silence. "You didn't just hurt me, you betrayed me. You took his side over and over again, even when it meant throwing me under the bus. And now you expect me to just what? Pretend it didn't happen?" "No," she said, her eyes pleading. "I don't expect that. I don't expect anything, Sarah. I just wanted you to know that I'm sorry. That I see now how much I hurt you, and I'll spend the rest of my life trying to make it right if you let me." Her words hit me harder than I expected, but I still couldn't shake the anger simmering beneath the surface. "You have no idea how hard it's been," I said, my voice shaking. "I had to rebuild my entire life from scratch because of what Ethan did, and you made it worse. You made me feel like I didn't even matter. I know, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. I know I failed you, and I'll never stop regretting that. The conversation ended with no clear resolution. I told her I needed time to think, and she nodded, saying she'd give me as much time as I needed. As I walked out of the cafe, my emotions were a tangled mess of anger, sadness, and something I couldn't quite place. I didn't know if I could trust her again, or if I even wanted to try. But for the first time in years, I felt like she was truly trying to understand the depth of what she'd done. Whether that was enough to rebuild our relationship was something only time would tell. The cafe meeting had left me emotionally drained, but I couldn't shake the nagging curiosity about what my mom had hinted at. Something about the way she said, "Ethan betrayed me too," had stuck with me, like a thorn in my side. I didn't want to care about what had happened to her after all the damage she'd caused, but a part of me couldn't help it. A week later, I agreed to meet her again. We sat at the same cafe, though this time the air between us felt heavier, like we both knew the conversation wasn't going to be easy. She looked nervous, her hands trembling slightly as she held her cup of tea. "I appreciate you coming," she started, her voice tentative. "I know I don't deserve it, but I want to be honest with you about everything." I folded my arms across my chest. "You said Ethan betrayed you," I prompted. "What did you mean by that?" Her shoulders slumped as she let out a shaky sigh. "After your divorce, when he moved in with me, I thought I was helping him. He said he needed time to get back on his feet, and I believed him. I let him stay rent-free, gave him meals, even loaned him money when he said he needed it." "How much money?" I asked, my voice flat. She winced. "Thousands of dollars," she admitted. "He promised to pay it back, but—" Her voice trailed off, and she looked down at the table, shame written all over her face. My jaw tightened. "But he didn't," I finished for her. She nodded, tears welling in her eyes. "It wasn't just the money," she said, her voice cracking. "He used me, Sarah. He told people I was pathetic for taking him in, that I was desperate for attention. When I found out, I felt so stupid. Hearing her say those words should have felt vindicating, but instead, I felt my anger rise to the surface. "So, let me get this straight," I said, my voice trembling. "You're only apologizing because Ethan hurt you? Not because of what you did to me?" "No," she said quickly, shaking her head. "That's not it. I've had time to think, and I see now how much I hurt you. I let you down in the worst way, and I'll never forgive myself for that." I stared at her, searching her face for any hint of insincerity. She looked genuinely remorseful, but I couldn't ignore the timing of her apology. It felt too convenient, like she was only seeing my pain now that she'd experienced her own. "You let him live with you," I said, my voice low but firm. "You took his side in the divorce. You repeated his excuses to me, as if they justified what he did. And now that he's screwed you over, you suddenly understand how I feel? Do you have any idea how insulting that is?" Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she wiped them away quickly. "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness," she said, her voice breaking. "But I'm trying, Sarah. I'm trying to make things right." Her words hung in the air, and for a moment, I didn't know how to respond. Part of me wanted to walk away, to leave her sitting there with her regret and her tears. But another part of me, the part that still remembered the mom who used to bake cookies with me on rainy days and hold me when I cried, wanted to believe her. "I don't know if I can forgive you," I said finally, my voice softer now. "You didn't just hurt me. You betrayed me. You made me feel like I didn't matter, like my pain wasn't real. And I don't know if I can ever trust you again." She nodded, as if she'd expected that answer. "I understand," she said, "and I don't blame you. But I'm not going to stop trying to prove to you that I've changed. You're my daughter, Sarah, and I love you. I just hope someday you'll let me back into your life." I didn't respond. Instead, I stood up, threw some cash on the table for my coffee, and walked out without looking back. That night, as I lay in bed, her words replayed in my mind. I wanted to believe she was sincere, that her regret was real. But the scars she'd left on my heart were still fresh, and I wasn't sure if I was ready to let her back in. Forgiveness wasn't something I could offer lightly, especially not to someone who had hurt me so deeply. If she wanted to rebuild our relationship, it would take more than words. It would take time, effort, and proof that she truly understood the damage she'd done. For now, all I could do was focus on myself. And if she was serious about making amends, she'd have to do the work to earn her place in my life again. When I agreed to meet my mom again, I did so with a mix of hesitation and resolve. I knew what I wanted out of the meeting, and more importantly, what I didn't. This wasn't going to be a quick fix or a teary reunion where everything suddenly became okay. If we were going to try to rebuild our relationship, it would have to be slow and deliberate on my terms. The cafe we chose was in a quiet part of town, tucked away from the bustling streets. I arrived early, my heart racing as I waited for her to show up. When she finally walked in, I was struck by how different she looked. She seemed smaller somehow, her shoulders hunched under the weight of something I couldn't quite name. Her hair was more gray than I remembered, and the lines on her face were deeper, etched with what I hoped was regret. "Hi, Sarah," she said softly as she approached the table. Her voice was tentative, almost afraid, and for the first time in years, I saw her not as the person who had betrayed me, but as a flawed human being trying to make amends. I didn't offer much warmth in return. "Hi," I said curtly, gesturing for her to sit. I wanted to keep things businesslike, at least at first. For a moment, she just sat there, fidgeting with a napkin in front of her. Finally, she looked up and said, "Thank you for meeting me again. I know I don't deserve it, but I'm grateful you're giving me this chance." "Let's just get to the point," I said, folding my arms across my chest. "What do you want?" She winced at my bluntness, but she didn't back down. "I wanted to see you," she said, "to tell you that I'm sorry. Truly, deeply sorry. I know I've said it before, but I didn't realize how much I'd hurt you until recently. I thought I was doing the right thing, but I wasn't. I failed you as a mother." Her words hung in the air, heavy with emotion. This time, though, they felt different. There was no defensiveness, no justifications, just a raw acknowledgement of the pain she'd caused. For the first time, I felt like she truly understood. "I appreciate the apology," I said, my voice steady. "But understanding the pain you caused doesn't erase it. What you did wasn't just a mistake. It was a betrayal. And it changed how I see you, how I see our relationship. I don't know if that's something we can fix." Tears welled in her eyes, but she nodded. "I understand," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't expect forgiveness overnight. I want a chance to show you that I'm trying, that I can be better." I leaned back in my chair, studying her carefully. Part of me wanted to believe her, to let her back in and start over. But another part of me, the part that had spent years rebuilding my life without her, wasn't ready to trust her again. "I'm not ready to forgive you," I said firmly. "I need time, and if we're going to rebuild this relationship, it has to be on my terms. That means you don't get to push me or guilt me into anything. You have to respect my boundaries, even if they don't make sense to you." She nodded quickly, tears spilling down her cheeks. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want a chance to make things right." For the first time in years, I believed her. There was something different about her this time, an honesty and vulnerability that hadn't been there before. But belief wasn't the same as trust, and I wasn't ready to let my guard down just yet. "I'm willing to try," I said cautiously, "but this isn't going to be easy. And if I feel like you're not respecting my boundaries, I'm done. Do you understand?" She nodded again, wiping her tears with the edge of her sleeve. "I understand," she said. "Thank you for giving me this chance, Sarah. I won't let you down." The conversation ended on a cautious note, neither of us quite sure what came next. As I walked away from the cafe, I felt a strange mix of emotions: relief, hope, and a lingering wariness that I couldn't quite shake. Setting boundaries had been hard, but it was necessary. If my mom was serious about rebuilding our relationship, she'd have to prove it through her actions, not just her words. And for the first time, I felt like I had the power to decide what kind of relationship I wanted with her, not the other way around. It was a small step, but it was a step nonetheless. And for now, that was enough. Rebuilding my relationship with my mom was like walking through a maze blindfolded. Some days, it felt like we were making progress, moving closer to something that resembled trust. Other days, it felt like we were right back where we started, tangled in the pain and resentment of the past. At first, I kept our interactions minimal. We met once a month, always in public places like cafes or parks where the conversation couldn't get too heated. She would ask about my life, trying to keep the tone light, while I carefully steered clear of anything too personal. I wasn't ready to let her all the way back in, and I made sure she knew it. But despite my guarded approach, there were small moments that gave me hope. One afternoon, she handed me an envelope filled with old photos from my childhood. "I thought you might want these," she said hesitantly. They were in a box in the attic. As I flipped through the pictures, me grinning on my first day of school, blowing out candles on a birthday cake, cuddling our family dog, I felt a pang of something I hadn't expected: gratitude. For all her flaws, she had been there for me once, in ways I'd almost forgotten. Those moments were rare, but they kept me from walking away entirely. She started showing small signs that she was really listening to me, not just hearing what she wanted to hear. She remembered little things I mentioned in passing, like my favorite coffee order or the name of the book I was reading. She also stopped bringing up Ethan, which was non-negotiable for me. I had made it clear from the beginning that he was off limits. I don't want to hear about him, I'd said during one of our early meetings. If you bring him up, I'm done. Do you understand? I understand, she'd said quickly, and to her credit, she stuck to that promise. It wasn't easy for her. I could see the strain in her face sometimes when the conversation skirted too close to the topic of the past. But she respected my boundary, and that meant more to me than any apology ever could. As the months went by, our meetings became more frequent. Once a month turned into once every 2 weeks, and eventually, we were meeting almost every weekend. Each conversation felt like a small step toward healing, though I never let myself forget the boundaries I'd set. There were still moments when the hurt felt too big to overcome, when the weight of what she'd done threatened to pull me back into the anger and bitterness I was trying so hard to leave behind. But I reminded myself that forgiveness wasn't about erasing the past. It was about finding a way to move forward. One day, after a particularly good conversation, she looked at me and said, "I'm proud of you, Sarah, for everything you've built for yourself." Her voice was sincere, and for the first time in years, I felt like she truly saw me, not as the daughter she'd failed, but as the person I'd become. Her words didn't erase the pain of the past, but they were a start. Through it all, I kept Ethan firmly out of the picture. He was a chapter of my life I had closed for good, and I wasn't about to let him creep back in through my mom. There were moments when I wondered if she still harbored any lingering loyalty to him, but if she did, she kept it to herself. The man who had once taken center stage in her life was now nothing more than a shadow in the background, and that was exactly where I intended to keep him. Rebuilding trust was slow and painful, but it wasn't impossible. For the first time in years, I felt like we were making progress. Not toward the relationship we used to have, but toward something new, something better. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But for the first time, I believe it was worth the effort. Forgiveness isn't a single moment. It's a decision you have to make over and over again, even when the memories resurface and the anger claws its way back. For nearly a year, I wrestled with that decision, trying to figure out if I could ever truly forgive my mom. There were days when I thought it was impossible. The weight of her betrayal would settle over me like a storm cloud, and I'd feel the sting of every harsh word she'd said, every moment she'd chosen Ethan over me. But there were also moments of clarity, brief flashes when I realized that holding on to the anger wasn't hurting her. It was hurting me. My therapist once told me, forgiveness doesn't mean you're excusing what she did. It just means you're freeing yourself from the power it has over you. Those words stuck with me, and slowly, I began to understand that forgiving her wasn't about letting her off the hook. It was about letting myself find peace. One afternoon, we met at a park near my apartment. The weather was perfect, warm but breezy, with just enough sunshine to make the world feel a little brighter. We found an empty bench under a tree, the kind of spot where big conversations felt slightly less overwhelming. We talked about everything and nothing for a while, the conversation meandering between casual updates and memories of better times. My mom seemed more relaxed than I'd seen her in years, but I could tell she was waiting for something, waiting for me to say the words she'd been hoping to hear. Finally, after a long pause, I took a deep breath and said, "Mom, I forgive you." Her eyes widened, and for a moment, she just stared at me, as if she couldn't believe what she'd heard. Then, tears began to stream down her face, and she reached for my hand. "Thank you, Sarah," she said, her voice trembling. "You have no idea how much this means to me." I squeezed her hand, but pulled it away gently. "I need you to understand something," I said. "Forgiving you doesn't mean things can go back to the way they were. Too much has happened. Too much has changed. If we're going to rebuild this relationship, we have to move forward. And that's going to take time." She nodded quickly, her tears still falling. "I'll do whatever it takes," she said, her voice earnest. "I just want a chance to make things right." For the first time, I believed her. Forgiving her didn't feel like the grand, cathartic moment I'd imagined. It wasn't a flood of relief or a sudden release of all the pain I'd been carrying. It was quieter than that, more like setting down a heavy bag after carrying it for miles. The weight didn't disappear entirely, but it was no longer something I had to hold on to. The next few weeks felt different. Our conversations became easier, less guarded. I didn't feel the same tightness in my chest when we spoke, the same urge to put up walls every time she said something that reminded me of the past. But I never let myself forget the lessons I'd learned. I kept my boundaries in place, knowing that forgiveness didn't mean erasing the past or pretending it hadn't happened. It meant acknowledging the pain, learning from it, and deciding not to let it define my future. There were still moments of doubt, times when I questioned whether I'd made the right choice. But those moments grew fewer and farther between, replaced by a cautious optimism that maybe, just maybe, we could build something new. One evening, as we were saying goodbye after a visit, my mom hugged me tightly and said, "I'm proud of you, Sarah, for everything you've done, for the person you've become. You've taught me more about strength and resilience than I ever could have taught you." Her words caught me off guard, but they meant more than I could put into words. For years, I had felt like she hadn't seen me. Not really. But now, for the first time, it felt like she was starting to understand who I was and what I had been through. Forgiving her wasn't the end of the journey. It was just another step, one that allowed us to keep moving forward slowly and cautiously toward a future that didn't erase the past but didn't let it control us either. And for the first time, I felt like that future was possible. Forgiveness is one thing. Trust is another entirely. After everything my mom and I had been through, I knew that rebuilding our relationship would be a slow, deliberate process. There were no shortcuts, no magical fixes that could undo the pain she had caused. But I also knew that holding on to the past wasn't the life I wanted for myself. I made the choice to let her back in, but only on my terms. That meant boundaries. Lots of them. I was clear from the start about what I needed: open communication, respect for my independence, and, most importantly, no room for manipulation or guilt trips. I wasn't the same person I had been when all of this started, and I wasn't going to let her take advantage of me again. At first, our progress was tentative. I didn't let her too close too quickly, and she respected that. She stopped trying to pry into every detail of my life, and instead let me share things at my own pace. When she made mistakes, and she didn't get defensive. She simply acknowledged them and apologized, something that would have been unthinkable a few years ago. It wasn't perfect. There were still moments when old wounds resurfaced, when a comment or gesture reminded me of the woman who had chosen Ethan over me. But every time that happened, she made it clear that she was willing to listen, to learn, and to do better. One evening, during one of our weekly phone calls, she said something that stuck with me. "I know I can't undo what I did, Sarah," she said, her voice heavy with regret. "But I want you to know that I see you now. I see how strong you are, how much you've accomplished on your own. And I'm so proud of you." For the first time, her words didn't feel like empty platitudes. They felt real, honest, and earned. Letting her back into my life didn't mean forgetting the pain she had caused. It didn't mean pretending everything was fine or erasing the years we had spent apart. What it meant was creating something new, something that wasn't weighed down by the past, but wasn't blind to it either. People love to say blood is thicker than water, as if family ties are unbreakable. But I've learned that family is about so much more than biology. It's about trust, respect, and mutual support. It's about being there for each other in a way that doesn't demand sacrifice, but instead fosters growth. My mom had failed me before, but she was doing the work to earn her place in my life again. The journey wasn't just about her, though. It was also about me. It was about learning to trust myself, to set boundaries and stick to them, to prioritize my well-being even when it felt selfish. For years, I had put everyone else first: Ethan, my mom, even the idea of what a family should be. Now, for the first time, I was putting myself first. And in doing so, I realized that letting my mom back in wasn't a sign of weakness. It was a choice, a conscious decision to move forward without forgetting the lessons I'd learned. Sitting across from her during one of our visits, I felt something I hadn't felt in years: hope. Not for the relationship we'd had, but for the one we were building together. It wasn't perfect, and it never would be. But it was real, and it was ours. And that was enough.